If you're a fan of the 4:30 movie, you'll love Best Movies Never Made, hosted by myself, Josh Miller,
and Steven Scarlatta,
where we explore some of the greatest movies never made, like E.T. 2,
Johnny Quest,
Beetlejuice Goes Hawaiian,
and Halloween 3D.
New episodes available every other Monday, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hi, this isn't Bill Shatner, but if I was, I'd be listening to the Inglorious Trexperts podcast. Why don't you?
Hey, this is Mark A. Altman, and if you're a Star Trek fan and you haven't already picked up the hardcover edition of the 50-Year Mission, it's time for you to go out and get the paperback version of the 50-Year Mission, which is just out in paperback from St. Martin's Press. This is the complete oral history of Star Trek, the first 25 years, from me and Ed Gross. And if you think you know everything there is to know about Star Trek, think again. The 50-Year Mission, out in paperback now. And if you can't read, the audiobook is still available.
Electric Now? What does that mean? It means that you can watch us do these wonderful podcasts and so many other things, too.
Hey, Darren,
yes.
When I was a kid, I used to love the Electric Company. You know why? Because I knew one day Morgan Freeman would be a great actor. But if there's one thing I love about electricity that's even better than Schoolhouse Rock and the Electric Company, it's the Electric Now channel.
But also, they're turning it on and bringing the power.
Yes, they are. And we're turning you on. And no,
that's highly inappropriate.
Okay, well, we are turning on the power here at Electric Surge, where you may have, for the last year or so, been enjoying these amazing audio podcasts like Inglorious Trexperts, the 4:30 movie, Best Movies Never Made. Now you can watch
You ain't
them.
seen nothing yet,
No,
but
you
now
haven't
you
seen
can.
anything. You can on Electric Now, available on Stirr TV and Distro TV, which you can download from your favorite app store, and soon coming to the Electric Now app. Get to see us as you've never seen us before, because you've only seen us in the theater of the imagination. Now we're going to be on your tablet, on your telephone, on your TV, and in your house.
The call is coming from inside the house.
So make sure to check out Electric Now, streaming now on Stirr TV and Distro TV, and coming soon to the Electric Now app.
Back in the 70s and 80s, before the advent of VHS, chances are if you saw a classic movie, it was on the 4:30 movie. With their famous theme weeks, it was a chance to see movies you'd never seen before and get reacquainted with some old classics. So now, join us for the 4:30 movie. No.
Secret agent man. Secret. Okay, so in case you haven't guessed, okay. Okay, how about this?
James Bond is the most famous spy ever. That is not a good spy.
You're right.
Dun, 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 dun.
Okay, that's better.
Dun,
That's better.
Dun, 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 dun,
Dun-dun-dun.
No? Okay.
Da-na-na.
Anyway, in case you haven't guessed, it's Spy Week on the 4:30 movie.
Yeah, baby.
And undercover night, we have Secret Agent Steve Melching.
Yeah, baby.
We have top secret, Darren Doctorman.
Open Channel D.
And we have the highly classified Ashley E. Miller.
I am shaken, but not stirred.
And I am, of course, Mark Altman. I'm so happy to bring you and invite you here to Spy Week, one of the great genres of film. And I'm sure back in the heyday of the 4:30 movie, there were a bunch of spy movies playing in heavy rotation.
No doubt.
You know, and I remember the Assassination Bureau and a couple other things were playing. But I want to make, before we start today's show, I want to remind you that back in the early days of this series, we did 7 days of 007. So none of the James Bond movies will be eligible for Spy Week. That's its own thing.
Right.
And, of course, we'll be doing a new James Bond show in February when my new book comes out, Nobody Does It Better, An Oral History of the James Bond Movies and Spy Mania, because I got to promote the book. So we will return to James Bond movies, but not
Hold
today.
your fire.
Yeah, no James Bond movies today. So, and that clears the table for a lot of other great movies, too. So, Bond is its own thing. And, we're gonna do spy movies excluding James Bond, the most famous gentleman agent with the license to kill and thrill, and has done so on numerous occasions. So basically, I mean, why are we so fascinated by skulduggery and espionage and spy movies, Steve Melching?
Well, it's just such an inherently dramatic milieu for films. You know, I mean, it's there's inherent danger, inherent suspense. It sort of begs to take the viewer into undercover situations or to exotic locales or dangerous situations. The stakes can be extremely high. The world could be at stake, or it could be very personal. It could be a very personal thing.
See, I would argue it's because they have great music. James Bond, Mission Impossible. I mean, you look at North by Northwest, which you could consider a spy movie. George Kaplan, he hit Bernard Herrmann score. I mean, these are great scores. So I think that's the real key.
Just the score.
Am I wrong?
You're not wrong. You're not wrong.
Okay.
But I think, like Steve mentioned, there's a whole lot of our imaginations go to when we see the news. We see all these sort of surface events happening, but it's so much more interesting to imagine the behind the scenes activities that are going on and what might be going on without anybody knowing about it.
Do you think, especially these movies were really popular, obviously in the 60s during the heyday of spy mania, it's the Cold War, but do you think it also has to do with the stakes? Because you look at something like Avengers Endgame, the whole universe is in play, right? One snap. So back in the 60s, our universe was Earth, and it definitely seemed as though Earth was in peril between these two superpowers, the U.S. and the Soviet Union. And, of course, that's part of what made it so fascinating, that the wrong move of the chess piece could lead to Armageddon.
Right. It's sort of a safe way of experiencing the Cold War. It's turning it into story so that we can process it and deal with it. But, there's also, and this is the thing that's, I think, maybe particular to James Bond movies versus, something like doing an adaptation of John le Carré or whatever, is part of the appeal was the glamour of it all, which is a strange thing to want to ascribe to a spy, right?
Yeah. Right.
But, there's a commonly held theory that a lot of the appeal of Ian Fleming's novels and then the movies were
the lifestyle.
Yeah, it was the lifestyle, right? It's like, you want to, Casino Royale, it's like, I mean, you're really just going across the channel, man. But like that was a big deal after World War II. It was like it seemed like that was the high life, right? It's James Bond, and this obviously isn't about Bond, but he has an Omega watch because like the Omega was aspirational. There were things about spies that were aspirational, and I think even when you take the glamour out of it, right, there is an aspirational component to wanting to be someone who could be a chameleon, who could be competent in every situation, who can be resourceful, who lives in a world where he doesn't necessarily trust everyone, but can find a way to muddle his way through.
Right. And can take on different personas and live different lifestyles.
That's right.
You're taking on the persona of a playboy. You're taking on the persona of something else.
You get to be Walter Mitty.
But also he has an Omega watch because Rolex didn't want to give them product placement.
That's right.
But I read in the upcoming book, Nobody Does It Better, the Galleys by Ed Gross and Mark Ullman, that what was interesting is coming out of World War II, where particularly in the UK, there was still rationing. There, food was scarce. That to have a character who is going to the best nightclubs, who always has food, who always has all these luxuries, and lived in that world. It was great because people were suffering. People were having a tough time. Even though they were no longer dealing with the Blitz and the war, they were still dealing with the aftermath of World War II. Right. So something like James Bond was very exciting to them because it was a world where they were traveling. And of course, you look at movies like The Third Man or something where, a lot of these cities are divided cities between the Allies and the Soviets and everything. And certainly Germany was such a, between East and West Germany, there was such not an elegance, but it was so mysterious and weird. All these different people with different agendas, but nobody was like, at least in the movies, they weren't usually killing each other. They were usually just trying to undermine each other.
Outsmart each other.
Yeah, and outsmart each other. So it was really like this great game of chess where who was smarter, and who could outsmart the other, get one up, the Soviets or one up
steal
the
the
Americans or the
microfilm
British that's I think it keeps coming back, to these movies, again and again. And, something like The Third Man was actually shot at the time in the city after. I mean, you look at a lot of these movies right after World War II that are shot on location in Europe, and these destroyed buildings are buildings that were destroyed in the war. And, that's Vienna, post World War II, and it's just a fascinating tapestry for these movies to take place in.
Plus, I think the main reason is that people sort of react to it is that it's taking big ideas, big economic and political discussions, and boiling them down to very personal relationships.
Yes, yeah.
So James Bond is England.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
And his adversary is Russia, or whatever he's Spectre, or whatever he's representing.
Yeah, and particularly after World War II, where a lot of people said it took the U.S. to break the Nazis back.
Right.
It's more complicated than that, but it was a chance for, particularly with Bond, for the UK to feel like the sun never set on the British Empire, that they were the center of the universe again.
Sure.
When sort of their sun was fading to a certain extent. But it is really remarkable. And I do love those 60 Cold War movies because we knew black and white. They were in a lot of shades of gray. And
At least we thought we did.
Right. At least we thought we did, at least in the movies.
Yeah.
And it isn't like the spy movies now where it all comes down, we got to get through that firewall. We got to figure out, disable the laser security.
I'm in. Right.
Yeah, I mean, where it's a bunch of people at keyboards, it was, that was, the trade craft of it. Something as simple in Dr. No, where he puts a little piece of tape on the door to see if anybody comes in, or a little hair on the door to see if anybody comes in and out of the hotel room while he's gone. That was the height of technology. Right. And it, to me, so much more interesting than somebody sitting at a keyboard, going,
Oh, sure,
I broke in. I'm turning off the security now.
A spy had to physically get inside, a secure location, get into a filing cabinet, or get into somebody's house and steal, something, or meet someone clandestinely, or over, eavesdrop on a conversation. Something like that.
And of course, and we'll get into this, in the wake of the huge success of the James Bond movies, which if you look at them, 1962, 1963, these were coming out once a year. Yeah, right. I mean, Dr. No, 62, 63 From Russia with Love, 64 Goldfinger. The success of these movies inspired a slew of imitators, some of which we may program this week. And it really isn't until the early 70s with Watergate that sort of the fanciful secret agent, we see in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the Wrecking Crew, Matt Helm. That was actually Cubby Broccoli's old partner, Irving Allen, who produced the Matt Helm series. He had turned down Bond. He had blown off Ian Fleming, and Broccoli and him separated, and then Broccoli partnered with Saltzman to get so now Irving Allen wants to compete with Bond, so he gets Matt Helm. But those movies are terrible. But Dean Martin's great, but they're terrible. But it was fun to see it in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Anyway, let's talk about the movies we want to see on the 430 movie.
Let's talk about spies.
Let's talk about spies. Thank you, Sean. Monday, Steve
It's
Melching.
funny, you gave me a good segue talking about the Bond films coming out one after another. Dr. No, From Russia with Love, Goldfinger. The film that I'm picking comes out right in the middle of that sequence, and it was a film that was made by a lot of the same people that made the Bond films.
You're doing it to me again. Son of a bitch.
And it is often thought of as the anti-James Bond.
Yeah, I know.
So you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the Ipcress File.
That was okay.
Starring Michael Caine. It came out in 1965. Came out the same year as Thunderball, although earlier in the year. And directed by Sidney Furie, based on the famous series of books by Len Deighton, produced by Harry Saltzman, who produced all those Bond films, the music by John Barry, who did a lot of classic scores, Ken Adams, the production designer, Peter Hunt was the editor, and it's the anti-James Bond because where Bond is glamorous and globe-trotting, the Harry Palmer brand is more a film noir, working class James Bond. It's very gritty and downbeat.
It's the blue collar James Bond.
Yeah. I mean, he goes home to kind of a crummy little average apartment, and he cooks his own food, and he wears those National Health Service plastic rim glasses that famously Austin Powers wears in the Austin Powers films. And he's it's a very not a glamorous thing, and he gets involved in uncovering this mind control project, and it was a movie that was, I think, pretty successful when it came out. It won the BAFTA in 1965 for Best British Film, as well as Best Art Direction and Cinematography. It was nominated for the DGA Award, and spawned a run of a couple more films. There were 2 sequels produced in the years following. Funeral in Berlin, directed by Guy Hamilton, another Bond director.
I was going to joke that would have been my pick after you took Chris Fox. That I was going to go with Funeral in Berlin.
Well, and my favorite, Billion Dollar Brain, directed by Ken Russell, which is just this kind of goes gonzo. But it's a really... I think it's kind of film that's kind of forgotten these days.
Well, you know why, Steve? It's not available.
Yeah.
It was never put out on Bluray.
Yeah,
it's
I have the
very
DVD
hard to
of it.
find. I think the DVD is out of print.
Yeah.
I lent my DVD to somebody, never got it back.
Oh, no.
And I actually was looking for it recently. I think probably for today. It's not available streaming.
Oh.
It's very hard to come by, and it's a great movie.
Yeah.
And a fascinating movie for Bond fans. One of the things is, unlike Cubby Broccoli, who would be content to do James Bond movies the rest of his life, they did one movie. He had done a lot of films, a lot of movies with not Glenn Ford, with Alan Ladd. And when he realized the gravy train that was Bond, so they did a Bob Hope movie called Call Me Buona after Dr. No. But that was the last time that he ever wanted to do sort of non-Bond movies. But Harry Saltzman wanted to just prove to the world he could do other things. So, of course, he optioned the rights to these Len Dayton books, in which, interestingly, it was a first-person character. So you never saw what he looked like. And yet the most iconic thing about Ipcress File is Michael Caine in those glasses.
Yeah.
And he just raided the Bond people. It was all these Bond people. And so it's such a fascinating
It's like you
thing.
wouldn't see that happen today. You wouldn't see a kind of a rival franchise just poach
by the
all
same people,
people.
but by the same producer.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because it was never what Bond was, but it definitely helped make Michael Caine a star. Obviously, Alfie was the big film, but I also think Funeral in Berlin, directed by Guy Hamilton, is terrific, and that's much more of a Cold War shot in East Germany. It's just fantastic, and some great performances across the board, and that is like a definitive kind of Cold War, East Germany, West Germany movie. But Ipcress File is more like a sci-fi movie, but in a good way, a sci-fi espionage movie. And I'd love to see it again.
Well, the tone of that is, and I think it all goes back to Len Dayton, right? I mean, I would think about the difference between Dayton and Ian Fleming is the difference between Marvel Comics and DC.
That's actually pretty close.
That's really a great analogy.
DC is so it's the
Straightforward.
epic, it's the gods, and with Len Dayton, his books are always about these schlubby guys who
Very
have to
grounded.
go home and cook dinner. And he wrote a whole trilogy, like the Berlin Game trilogy, where it's really just a whole meditation on being in a marriage. I mean, that's the thing that really interested Len Dayton. And with the Ipcress File, you can go crazy with like the elements that sort of feel fantastical, because everything else feels so grounded, because that's what interests Dayton. And that shows up in almost all of his work. And it would be actually fascinating to sort of sit down and look at the differences between, say, Fleming and Dayton and Jean Le Carré, right? Because Le Carré kind of lives in this very, it's definitely the Cold War, and it's very professional, but it's also a little bit elevated. It's a little bit romanticized in a different way than Fleming romanticizes it.
Well, because Fleming didn't like Le Carré.
Right.
Fleming, but also Le Carré really lived it, whereas Fleming kept inflating his
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 involvement is
wartime experience and involvement, and maybe I kind of was James Bond, and it's like no,
You kinda weren't,
but Le Carré really kind of was that guy.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's interesting. But But and you know who's in Ipcris File and all those subsequent movies is Guy Dolman, who was also in Thunderball. He played Count Lippy, and he plays Michael Caine's boss, who is far from Bernard Lee as you could imagine, and he's just very dry and English, and he's a great actor, and he's a lot of fun in those movies, sort of putting Michael Caine through the ringer. And Michael Caine is so like, I don't give a about anything. It's just like, it's so funny. He's so dry and just cool and doesn't give a shit about anything. It's a great. I wish there had been more of them. You know, it's like.
Well, I think I was doing a little bit of reading about this the other day, and I guess they made 2 more Harry Palmer films
for
in
television,
the 90s?
but not with him.
Yeah.
Yeah, or maybe they were with him, but they were for Showtime or something.
Yeah, I don't know.
I've never seen those.
No.
Do you think he'd want to do another now?
We want to option the
Just
rights?
pitch it to him.
I think he would.
I bet he would.
I bet he would too.
Yeah.
Well,
I
he
think that would
kind
be
of,
amazing.
in a way, in
with
the
Harry
Austin
Brown.
Powers sequel, he came back as playing the father.
Yeah,
It's
but
a
no,
little
I
bit
mean
of
like a real
full-on
a
Harry
full-on Harry Palmer, at 80.
I think that
Yeah.
would be awesome.
I think it would too.
Yeah, I would love to see that.
Yeah. Let's call him.
Let's do that.
Well, Michael, a couple weeks ago we did Gene Hackman Week. Michael Caine's another guy who, like, you just
absolutely.
can't.
Yeah.
I mean, the amount of great movies. Now, the amount of crap he did too, but the amount of great movies he's done, you can't fit in 5 days.
Well, there's a great bit in PCU where I think it's Jeremy Piven's character is doing his senior thesis on, can he turn on the television anytime, day or night, and find a movie starring Michael Caine or Gene Hackman?
That's funny.
The answer is yes.
The answer is yes.
That's a great pick to start us off on Monday. Darren, Tuesday.
I'm gonna move out of the Cold War, or am I? That's the big question as to what's going on in this movie, because it directly sort of addresses what happens when the Cold War is ended, and how the resulting fallout deals with world events. My choice is from 1992, and it's Phil Alden Robinson's Sneakers.
Good choice. Yeah, great choice.
which
Robert Redford,
I stand by as being the best Mission Impossible movie ever made.
Yeah.
Because it is Mission Impossible, literally.
Yeah.
And the actors in this are so good, and so the characterizations are so varied and interesting that everyone has their role and everyone does their job, and it's really fun to see the plan come together as things happen. Obviously, Robert Redford is the head of this security company that helps other companies beef up their security. They try and break through their systems and steal stuff from them in order to help them determine ways to avoid that happening by real bad people. And they are brought into this web of intrigue surrounding a device that can decode any codes, computer codes, ciphers, anything. And it's this sort of magic box that this mathematician dreamed up. And it's fascinating because they are basically hired ostensibly by the government, and it turns out that not everything is what it seems. And they get deeper and deeper into a big mess. And it is so much fun to watch happen, and it's so much fun to watch all these characters have their
These quirky, weird
they're
characters.
What a great
so
cast.
well written.
Is it Dan Aykroyd?
Dan
is one of them?
Aykroyd plays Darren Roscow. I remember that because it's so close to my own name. But it's he is a believer in cow mutilations and UFOs.
What was that show on CBS that clearly ripped off Sneakers?
Oh.
It was about a bunch of sort of weird, offbeat social misfits who are brilliant, who solve crimes,
I don't remember.
But
I don't watch TV.
Magnum
okay.
PI.
No. Anyway, it was on for a couple of years,
Yeah.
and I feel like that was basically Sneakers, the TV series.
But yeah, what a great cast. I mean, and all the characters were so well written and so well. I mean, River Phoenix is
my God.
amazing.
He's
Sidney Poitier.
Yeah.
Sidney Poitier and what's his name who plays the blind sound
David
man.
Strathairn.
David Strathairn.
yeah.
he's David
So
Strathairn,
good,
everything.
and he has to drive the van in one sequence, and it's just so hilarious, and he has so much fun doing it. And
Ben Kingsley.
Ben Kingsley is ostensibly the villain.
Yeah.
River Phoenix.
Yeah.
Mary
And of
McDonnell.
course Mary McDonnell, the president of the colonies.
Colonies,
right.
yeah.
She's great as Robert Redford's ex, who is brought back into one last plot. But it's so well written and so much fun.
Yeah.
And I love it.
Was this Phil Alden Robinson's follow-up to Field of Dreams?
Yes,
Yeah.
I believe so.
Yeah,
Right
it's a
after that, yeah.
Terrific movie.
Yeah.
Terrific spy movie. Super fun. Great James Horner score.
Didn't
All-
they film a scene? I remember there's a big scene that takes place in. They filmed in Courthouse Square on the Universal Studios lot.
Oh,
That-
yeah.
The courthouse is redressed as was it a mansion or
No,
it
was-
the building
it was-
they're breaking into?
It was a flashback
Yeah.
to when they were in
On
college.
college, that's right.
And when the cops come and catch them hacking into banks and things like that.
That's right.
I actually had the pleasure of working with Walter Parks for a few years in a couple of
Yeah.
different projects, which was always interesting. That guy he has so much energy. He has a great head of hair.
Yes.
And a very smart writer. And when we would break story, I mean, we would always kind of come back to Sneakers as kind of the sort of the platonic ideal of kind of what we thought a great ensemble felt like, and like what a great thriller structure really was, because I felt like they really nailed it in that movie, and it was so light on its feet, and just delightful in every way, but it always had gravity. It never felt like it was just going to kind of trip off and be about nothing. It was really about something. And Redford is great, and Ben Kingsley is great. They have an amazing relationship. All the twists feel earned. It's just, you can just, my God, it sounds silly, but they dance in this movie and you love it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just, they literally are dancing and I love the fact that they're doing that. And they all just love the hell out of each other. It's just it's like watching Star Trek.
It kind of is. Yeah.
So I got a question as we move on. A great pick from Darren. Why are they installing seatbelts in theaters this summer? Because
Keep
Ashley's
lying.
about to pick his pick for maybe it should be putting out vomit bags. I don't know, but we'll find out. So Ashley, Wednesday, the day is yours and always unexpected.
So I've got an out of the box pick, but I think I'm going to keep it for Friday.
Okay, that is your. That's a
I'm gonna
risk.
stay
It's always a risk.
somewhere inside the box today, because I feel like it's strange. This movie redefined how we think about spy films, and I think in a lot of ways it even helped to redefine Bond, and had a huge influence on the Daniel Craig films. Although for whatever reason, I think people forget. They forget about it when talking about the franchise, because I think they think more about the Paul Greengrass films. I'm talking about Doug Liman's Bourne Identity, which I think is frankly the best of the Bourne films. Like, period, hands down, full stop, period, end of sentence. Somebody described the Bourne Identity as the movie that revolutionized the action sequence with a map. And the scene that they were talking about is when Jason Bourne he's in the embassy, and he's trying to escape, and he just stops, and there's a map of the facility on a wall, and he stops and he looks at it, and they take a moment to show him reading that map, and then everything else that follows, you totally get it. And what it tells you is this is a guy who thinks on his feet, who is incredibly smart, incredibly resourceful. You buy, even like the most fantastic moments in the movie, you buy into it because you believe Matt Damon. He seems as confused about everything as you do, and somehow it takes all of the really cool aspirational spy crap and turns it into things that are a little bit scary and a little bit weird. Like when he's sitting in a diner with Franco Potente and he's like looking around and he's saying, "I know why, that guy over there is blah, blah, blah. And I know like the license plate numbers of every car and truck in the parking lot. And I know this and I know this, but what I don't know is who I am." Right. I mean, it's just it's amazing when he gets into a fight and it's just instinctive, and you can tell just watching Damon, he doesn't understand how he's doing what he's doing. It's a great story. It's a great thriller based on a Robert Ludlum novel. And Ludlum was kind of the master of structure in the sense of how to build hooks into your story. Ludlum, like we were just talking about Dayton and Le Carre and Fleming, Ludlum is a completely different way of looking at the spy thriller. I mean, there's one of my Friday picks is going to be another Ludlum adaptation, but
Fourth Protocol.
No, but I love The Bourne Identity. I think that I was about as cranky with the beginning of was Supremacy the second movie?
Yeah, and then Ultimatum.
Yeah, like I was about as cranky with that as some people were about the beginning of Alien 3. Because I felt like The Bourne Identity had this great ending, with Brian Cox and Matt Damon and Franco Potente, and it's like, and it didn't necessarily have to kind of run off and sort of everything's a happy ending, but it was potentially leading into something really super interesting. Chris Cooper is in it, and he's great. I mean, there's so many great, cool action scenes. It's on some level, it is the anti-Bond, because instead of a car chase, along a cliffside and an Aston Martin, is a car chase down a stairwell, like in a Mini Cooper.
Chase.
I mean, it's a great chase.
As is the cat and mouse in the train station, which is phenomenal.
100%. And then you get like these moments that are just kind of weird and sad and dark, like Clive Owen, who is a sniper, who's another agent of Treadstone who gets activated, and he's trying to kill Jason Bourne, and it's like this great scene in a farmhouse, and it's very simple. And Bourne gets out there, and he's about to take out Clive Owen, and it's like, do you still have the headaches? It's just wow! It's just little details like that just make that movie great, and the action it's all comprehensible while being just incredibly frenetic, which is very difficult to pull off. So I love The Bourne Identity.
That first Bourne Identity is so good. And Matt Damon is great. And I understand what you're saying about the second film. After this we've invested in Franca Portente and him saving her and reuniting that wonderful ending. And then to negate it all, Newt is dead. Michael Biehn is dead, and it's like, what? So. And
it was just inspired casting. Like Franca Potente had just come off of Run Lola Run, and what's his name?
Matt Damon.
No. Clive Owen had just done the Croupier.
Yeah, he just done Croupier, and everybody was talking about him as the next James Bond, and instead he does this. Yeah. And it was, it's great, and it's so smart. Yeah. And, I talked about earlier how I'm sick of cell phones, but like this used that kind of stuff in a really smart way, the computer and the cell phone. And, it was a modern spy thriller, but it felt credible. It felt like the spycraft was real.
What this felt like to me was, what if you made a James Bond movie starring Indiana Jones? So like that sort of everyman, it had that sort of everyman quality, that sort of improvisational, smart character, in these situations. That's what it kind of felt like.
Well, there's a great mystery at the heart of it, and and there's that classic staple of 70s spy movies, the evil CIA that is trying to cover up their mistake. So we saw that in 3 Days of the Condor. A lot of movies like that, the Parallax. It's always the evil, and it's done very well. Chris Cooper is fantastic. Later on, David Strathairn again. We talked about comes out later in the franchise, and and then of course, who was it? It was the wonderful Joan Allen.
Joan
fantastic
Allen,
later in the franchise.
What year was 2000? What year was this?
It was something like that. Let's go to the phones, which we never do.
Let's go to the videotape.
At 2002.
Oh, okay.
Okay, because I was up. Okay.
I honestly, my biggest beef with the sequels, other than like the death of Franco Potente's character at the top of Bourne Supremacy, and then feeling like there were now no stakes in the story, was that I feel like the movies that followed were all essentially remakes of the first film. Like, he was on the same journey. Like, every single movie, like clockwork, wait for it. In the third act, he finds out his real name. Like, and sometimes like he finds out stuff he already knew. It's the weirdest thing. But in the first movie, like that central mystery of who this character is, like really, really works. And you just believe it and buy it, and you don't even need to watch the other films to just love it and appreciate it.
Yeah, I don't like the third one, The Ultimatum, that much. I think the middle one, I agree with you about your criticism of it. It's a pretty good film, and of course, Greengrass really changed the way these movies are edited or the way they're shot. But I think the first one is the best film for sure. And again, a testament to a really strong producer in Frank Marshall that movie is as good as it is, given everything that happened with Doug Liman on the set of that movie.
Right.
So really, really great choice. So now we're in Thursday.
Thursday, yes, that's you, Mark.
There's some very iconic, formidable spies
Formidable.
that they're sent on missions. And very capable, but other than James Bond, there's probably no more capable and relentless and brilliant spy than the star of A Man Called Flintstone. A Man Called Flintstone.
Oh my goodness!
I'm not really going to go with A Man Called Flintstone, but I do think we talk about Spy Mania in the '60s, and it shows you how much this was everywhere. Yeah. Spy Mania was everywhere. I mean, even the Flintstones, even Fred Flintstone got in on the action.
It was on TV with I Spy and Man from U.N.C.L.E. and spies
it
everywhere.
It was crazy. And I will say, I actually kind of like the Mission Impossible franchise. But I'm not going to go with that. Steven Soderbergh's Haywire, I think, is a really underrated movie. But my pick is going to be, and I want to make sure with Zach that I haven't picked this before, because it is. I've said this before. It's probably one of my favorite movies of all time. It's a very easy pick for me. I think. I'm surprised it wasn't my pick for movies we're thankful for, but fortunately I can slot it into spy movies very easily, and that would be the story of Audrey Hepburn on the run from Carson Dial. Charade.
So
directed by Stanley Donen. It's been called the greatest Hitchcock movie Hitchcock never made, and Cary Grant is many characters in this movie. Carson Dial, Alexander Dial, Peter Joshua, Alexander Cruikshank. Audrey Hepburn is Regina Lampert, and her husband has died, been murdered on a train. Could have been plane, trains, and automobile race too. And now Walter Matthau has approached her and says her life is in danger unless they can find this money that her husband absconded with during the war. It is a great spy movie. Yeah. It is a great spy movie. It is effortless. It is smart. It is charming. It is romantic. It is suspenseful. It has an amazing cast: Cary Grant, Audrey Hepburn, James Coburn, Walter Matthau, also George Kennedy. Can't go wrong with George Kennedy.
Nope.
Kids love George Kennedy. Yep. And it is charming and has an amazing Henry Mancini score. I have to tell you, the first time that I ever went to France, one of the first things I did in Paris was to go to the Palais, to go to those columns where the shootout at the end is. And I have these great pictures. In fact, Robert and I were there for we were invited to a Star Trek convention. And the most important thing, I was like, no matter what we do, I got to go to the Palais. And reenacted the whole shootout at the end of the movie. And it was great. It's shot in Paris. Paris looks beautiful. Gorgeous city, and it's just a great movie. It's so Peter Stone wrote it. It is brilliantly written. It's a textbook screenplay in screenwriting. It's just effortless, and there's not a wrong note in this movie. And I love Charade. I have the one sheet, and can't say enough great things about it.
I love everything about Charade. First of all, Audrey Hepburn is luminous. Yes. But she's also really terrific because she was always really terrific.
And resourceful.
Totally resourceful. No, I mean, this is like one of those... I love spy movies that are about, at the end of the day, really about real people who are caught up in things that are bigger than they are. I mean, that to me is always like I'm in. And it's what separates that from something like a Bond film, where he's obviously not, the everyman or the everyday person who's caught up in the big adventure. He's the guy you want to be. But Charade is just so well directed. It's beautiful to look at. I didn't discover this movie until, discover it for me until maybe 10, 15 years ago, and just completely fell in love with it. What a terrific pick.
And it's so great when Walter Matthau corrects Audrey Hepburn, who says, women make the best spies. He goes, agents, Mrs. Lampert. And then later he says something about spies, and he says, agents. And she corrects him. So I don't know if this is a spy week or not, because we're talking about secret agents. It's secret agents, but it's such a great movie. It's utterly flawless.
Well, if they're on your side, they're agents. If they're on the other side, they're spies.
Well, if they're agents, all their screenwriters have to fire them.
But I'm bummed.
But a great movie.
Indeed.
So that brings us to Friday. So many more movies to consider.
Friday.
I don't know where to start.
The packet has been leaked that shows the title of the movie that we've chosen for Friday. So
I hate it when I get a leaky packet.
We have to find the leak and stop it from getting out there by basically giving out all the information that's in it. And so we have to determine that.
Well, here's a question. Does this work for Spy Week? I don't know. Blue Velvet. Kyle MacLachlan, is kind of a hardy boy on as spying on Dorothy Jones.
Wow.
Mark, I don't think so. Because
it's more detective.
Yeah, that's a detective story. Because it seems to me that there needs to be some much larger things going on.
Yeah,
that these
I agree
people
with that.
are working
So Brick
for.
wouldn't be eligible either.
No, that's a detective
Yeah,
movie
okay.
for sure.
So,
But I think The Matrix might.
The Matrix might be.
The Matrix might be.
I mean, I'm not serious,
Yeah.
but it's something to think about.
You know
because
what movie got a bad rap? I know a lot of people don't like this. I happen to think it's really terrific. It's definitely all style over substance, but I thought it also it's an era that I love, and it was a great sort of the last gasp of the Cold War was Atomic Blonde with Charlize Theron.
Yeah, I got that.
Charlize
A.
with Jessica
Theron.
Puttermaker.
Yes.
And I just think it's a terrific. Again, you can't pay too much attention, but it's all style. And it's beautifully shot, great fight scenes, and it really the soundtrack is fantastic. All these great '80s movies, music, but it really captured the death of the Cold War, the fall of the Berlin Wall. It's all set against the backdrop of the end of the of East Germany. I mean, it's really and for those of us who lived through it, it's actually kind of really cool.
We mentioned John le Carré earlier. Mm-hmm. There have been several great adaptations of John le Carré, including Tinker Tailor, Soldier Spy, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, Tailor of Panama. Mm-hmm. I really enjoyed Tailor of Panama.
I think of those as spy stories for accountants because they have the same amount of detail that you need to have in a ledger. To be able to follow everything.
I got to go with Steve. I think Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy is masterful.
It's great.
Storytelling.
It's great.
And Tailor Panama was described to me once as the best Bond movie Pierce Brosnan ever did.
Right.
So I think those are both really great movies.
If we go into a different direction, we have Austin Powers.
Yes.
International Man
Groovy,
of Mystery.
baby.
And Who Shagged Me. Goldman.
I think the first one's the only one.
The first one
is
is the only.
Then it just gets ridiculous.
It just gets goofy.
You know what I've said a lot of times on the show that my favorite Tony Scott movie is Crimson Tide, but actually I think Spy Game is with Brad Pitt and Robert Redford, which I think is a wonderful movie. Really great spy film, beautifully directed by Tony Scott. Really smart. I'm a big fan of that movie, and it has a nice twist, and of course, it's Robert Redford on his last day at the CIA, and he's manipulating events to potentially rescue his protege, who he had a falling out with Brad Pitt. I think it's a really great movie. You mentioned on another podcast, I think a movie we all love, which is Ronin.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is not only one of the great car chases. John Frankenheimer comes back with a vengeance. It's a spy movie because Robert De Niro and Jean Reno are both spies in that.
Yeah. Great cast in that film.
Great
Great car chase.
So well done, and it handles the mysteries that are going on very adroitly.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't really tell you anything about what's going on.
The case is the ultimate MacGuffin.
Yeah.
You don't know what's in there. It's just a case. They need the case.
You know as much as they know.
What's in the case?
And speaking of luminous, Natasha McElhone in that movie is just luminous. And I believe that movie just came out on Blu-ray relatively recently.
No, I think it was reissued.
Reissued, okay.
Arrow reissued it because MGM had done a bare bones release, which was
Okay.
fine.
Yeah.
But Arrow did a better version with more special features, which is quite good. Now, if you're a fan of the movie or haven't seen it, highly recommend the Arrow version of Ronin. Because now what's happening is none of the studios care about their catalogs anymore, so all these sort of boutique
Secondary
labels are
companies have to
releasing
pick up on
these titles in much better versions.
Kino
like
Lorber,
Shout
Shout
Factory, which is a great thing.
I'm surprised. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I mentioned Haywire earlier. Also, Munich was a movie I championed on Spielberg Week, which we didn't pick.
Right.
I think that's a great spy movie with Michael Lonsdale. And of course Daniel Craig and some great cast about tracking down the Palestinians who killed the Israeli athletes during the Munich Olympics.
And of course, we did pick this before for some week, and you mentioned it during your pick, 3 Days of the Condor.
Right.
I
that's
don't
a
believe
great
that was
movie.
picked before. I'm pretty sure it was not.
It might have been mentioned and then not picked.
Yeah.
I think we picked 2 Days of the Condor. But
We didn't take the sequel.
But speaking of, another Robert Redford starring
Robert
role
Redford
in a spy
is
movie. He did a lot of spy movies.
You can't swing a dead cat around these spy movies without hitting Robert Redford.
directed by Sidney
Black
Pollack.
Sunday.
Yeah.
It's
Faye Dunaway.
Faye Dunaway.
It's amazing.
Wonderful
It's
movie.
one of my favorite movies of all time, and the casting in it is amazing.
Oh, there's so many great people. You know who's so freaking great in it? Cliff Robertson.
Oh, yeah.
Talk about smarmy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love this movie. I mean, it's a movie that opens up, Robert Redford goes out to lunch, basically, and comes back to find everyone in the office dead.
Yeah.
They've
And
all
now
been
he's on the run.
Yeah, and he's
And
on the
there's
run.
nobody
Like,
to
who
trust.
killed him? Why is he?
Right.
It's a great setup.
And then he kidnaps.
It just teaches
Faye
you to go
Dunaway.
out for lunch.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Right? That's the
Don't
moral of the
order
story.
in.
Because
Yeah,
you just
never
order
order in.
Postmates.
Right.
Nobody would go out. He'd be dead. That would be the end of the movie. We shouldn't order Postmates. We should have gone out for lunch. If they just gone out for lunch.
But if Postmates wants to sponsor us, we'll completely change that opinion.
My alt picks was Sam Peckinpah's final film, The Osterman Weekend.
interesting.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Which I don't know if it necessarily holds together in terms of
Come
just
on,
the
baby, hold
storytelling
together.
and the plotting, but it's just so relentlessly interesting and it's so well cast. It's John Hurt, who is really, he's on this mission for vengeance, and he gets Rutger Hauer, who plays this television broadcaster, involved in this effort to expose these Soviet spies, and it turns into this whole other thing. And it's just super cool. It was probably one of the first spy movies I ever saw, I think, as I watched it with my dad.
And it was released posthumously. I believe he had died during the making of it. They
right.
finished it after he died.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there's a big one that we haven't mentioned yet.
What's that?
The Manchurian Candidate.
Oh, yes. Would you like to play a game of solitaire, Steve? Yeah, that's a great pick. Frank Sinatra, Lawrence Harvey, and Angela Lansbury. It's the queen of my heart.
Out of the box, there's Captain America: Winter Soldier, which I don't love as much as most people do, but I think it definitely fits into the category. It's definitely it's sort of evoking those 70s spy thrillers
It
with,
does.
with Captain America.
It's
And
a
again,
legitimate thing to bring up.
Robert Redford.
Robert Redford.
yeah,
You know
yeah.
what? You just like when Robert Redford is in the CIA, bad things are just going to happen. And then there's also, of course, and I think maybe you mentioned this, maybe between podcasts, but the spy thriller, the classic Cars 2.
Oh,
yes.
that's so funny because we had talked about that for Plane, Trains, and Automobiles Week, and then we never mentioned it. But Cars 2 is one of the great James Bond homages, and people are probably laughing because everybody says, "Oh, Cars 2." The conventional wisdom is Cars 2 is a terrible movie. It is not a terrible movie. Cars is silly.
Yeah.
But Cars 2 is a James Bond. It's like a Roger Moore James Bond movie. But the best thing about it is Michael Caine as Finn McMissile.
Yes.
With the glasses.
Yes, with the glasses.
Great.
He did do a Harry Palmer
sequel.
sequel.
How could you not love Cars 2? I don't get the amount of disdain for that movie. I mean, like Cars was some Pixar classic.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, the best thing about it is Paul Newman, right? Yeah. And it's like, it's fine. I like Cars, but Cars 2 is like, it's fun. It's a genre. It's a total James Bond
and
love
it's a great
letter.
babysitter
It's
for the
beloved
kids.
in the middle of the country.
Cars.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So,
There's a few more. The Third Man.
yes,
Of course.
Zither me this, Batman.
Army of Shadows, which I think we mentioned
talked
on a
about.
previous
Still
podcast.
completely relevant. Brilliant about the French Resistance.
The Lives of Others.
Oh
Yeah.
yes, yeah, about East German secret police. Was that the Stasi?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a great movie. You know what? Would I have to mention? Neither of which should be on the show. In Like Flint and Our Man Flint. The James Coburn, much better than Material. You know, both of these are terrible movies in retrospect.
Well,
Zowie.
they're better than the Mad Hell movies.
Yeah, that's true. They are better than
So,
the Mad Hell movies.
Look, the first movie is a lot of fun.
It's fun.
Our Man Flint, and you know, I would give it certainly a position next to Austin Powers.
Yeah, I would argue they don't hold up as well as I remember them.
Right.
They're still, because of James Coburn's charisma and star wattage, they work.
Absolutely.
But yeah, they're a little dated, but they definitely had that whole, there was that whole era of also, what was it, Modesty Blaze at the time.
Oh, yeah.
Those Fox films. So, I mean, they're not without their delights, but nothing I think that we would want to program for. And a Jerry Goldsmith score.
Absolutely.
So
There's a obscure candidate. I mean, it's a little bit like Gran Torino meets the Ipcress File. It's Harry Brown with Michael Caine.
Oh, yes.
yeah.
That was
which
good.
he plays like the ex sort of, it's his background is murky, but he's sort of ex SAS, maybe spy, and it's just all of this kind of neighborhood
lives
gang
in this kind
violence
of
drama.
crummy apartment block.
Yep, and it's just kind of awesome. And
Yeah.
Michael Caine, he's Michael Caine.
Michael
Of
Caine,
course, he's awesome.
You know what I don't hate at all? The remake of The Man from U.N.C.L.E.
I don't either.
Yeah,
I was going to
I
mention
think
that.
it is super fun.
Yep.
Very enjoyable.
And I think they're both great in it, and it looks amazing. The costumes are fantastic. The production design is great. It's
Darren's person that's
colorful
LSD
and rich, and a great score, and does really Alicia Vikander and it's just, I think it's terrific.
a bit long, but for me, that was a year there were all these spy movies that came out, including Skyfall, and the Bond film was the worst one of all the spy films from my
But
book.
you sure it wasn't Spectre?
Maybe it was Spectre. It was
Yeah.
Spectre.
A movie that came out at the same time, nearly the same time, that I think is yards better than the Man from U.N.C.L.E. movie is Kingsman.
Yes,
The first one?
Yes.
Yes.
The first one.
Well,
I like Kingsman.
I like
It's
it.
terrific.
I think it's so fresh a take on that kind of stuff and so well done, especially the
scene in the church.
the scene in the church is like nothing you've ever seen before.
Yeah.
It's like the Matrix.
too.
Yeah, it's like no, but it's like the Matrix has the core of an idea, and this is it realized to its full potential. But I think all the performances are great. I think all the characters are wonderful, and I liked it so much more than I did Man from U.N.C.L.E.
Yeah, I like Man from U.N.C.L.E. better, but I
Kind
understand.
of with you guys.
I mean, I like Kingsman. I don't like the sequel, but I like the original Kingsman. I think there's also, look, the De Palma Mission Impossible is a real spy thriller. Then it becomes more of an action adventure franchise. I mean, 2 is worthless. JJ did a nice job with the third one, and then there are the McQuarrie films, which
I think the second McQuarrie film is the best one.
Ghost Protocol.
Ghost Protocol.
I
is
love Ghost
so
Protocol,
good.
and everyone was falling all over themselves to praise Fallout, the last one.
Yeah,
which
it's
I
not
think
as good
is-
as Ghost Protocol.
It's not
it's not
nearly
nearly
as
as
good
good.
as Ghost Protocol, which is a much better,
Yeah.
tighter, smarter movie.
and it's much more Mission Impossible.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I completely agree with that. And, Ghost Protocol is a legitimate pick. I mean, I think that whatever you say about Mission Impossible, it's a franchise you get your money's worth.
Yeah.
And it's generally smart. And I think McQuarrie's done a nice job with the movies.
Yeah.
JJ did a good job with the movies. I think Fallout was praised way out of proportion. It's when it was kind of, I think, the least successful of his films. Whereas
It had some good set pieces in it.
absolutely,
It had its
but that's
moments.
what it
There's
was.
no question.
It was
Yeah.
a succession of set pieces.
Yeah.
Right.
Whereas Ghost Protocol just really holds together as a really smart movie. But the one before it is quite good too. The one in Dubai.
Whatever the hell that was.
I just
the
had
name
it.
of it. Nation something.
Rogue Nation.
Rogue Nation.
Rogue Nation. Yeah.
Right. Rogaine Nation.
Rogaine Nation.
Well, a spy movie that I've always had a soft spot for, that it's kind of a guilty pleasure, but I think it's just a really solid movie that has yet to find its way onto Blu-ray, is James Cameron's True Lies.
Yeah.
With Arnold Schwarzenegger playing a spy who works for, what was the name of the company he worked for?
Omega Sector.
Omega Sector, and he's married to Jamie
Omega
Lee
17.
Curtis.
Right.
And maintaining this illusion that he's just an average like accountant or something.
I like True Lies. The problem for me is that you look at Arnold Schwarzenegger and you never imagine he's anything but a secret agent.
Yeah.
You can never. I mean,
Okay.
It was the whole Total Recall problem.
Yeah,
It was
thank
written-
you.
Yeah.
That's
yeah,
exactly what I was about to
it's
say.
exactly the same problem.
He is a spy in Total Recall. I think Total Recall potentially counts.
I think it does.
A secret agent. But
I
it's
think it
future agent.
absolutely
Future
does.
secret
Yeah.
agent. Yeah.
Yeah, you and not you, me.
Yeah.
Welcome to the party, director.
I don't know. True Lies was just kind of a fun throwback. It was,
I would
Cameron
really-
obviously making a James Bond movie.
I would really like to see True Lies recast. And I don't know who I would recast.
I was
Bill
never a
Paxton is
huge
terrific.
True
Oh my
Lies
God,
fan.
Bill
Bill
Paxton.
Paxton in that movie.
I just felt like it's exactly what it was. It was James Cameron wanted to make a James Bond movie.
Sure.
He made a James Bond movie.
It's fun.
It's fun.
It's entertaining.
It's fun. So,
And we talked about this, I think, off mic. No Way Out.
yeah, I was just
yeah.
going to say the same thing.
That was also on my list.
A great
Kevin Costner
spy movie.
Spy movie.
Who's the spy?
Yeah.
It's about finding out who the spy is. Who is this Yuri?
And it has a great
Ticking clock.
twist ending, which we will not spoil in case you
So
haven't seen it.
great.
Unless
That'd
we
be great
do
for
this for
spoiler week.
Look out, you've got no way out.
There's also, we mentioned North by Northwest, which we picked in another week, of course.
And Notorious.
And
Which we also
Notorious.
picked in.
There's also Buck Rogers in the 25th Century. Buck Rogers, in fact, they say it in the movie.
That's
You
right.
have no identity in the future. Nobody knows who you are. You make the perfect secret agent. Now, of course, that was in the TV version, not in the theatrical version. But
You know
of the
far
pilot.
too much about this.
But I do. But, he is a secret agent of the future.
Yeah,
That
no,
is
he's
true.
not.
They say it in the thing. They say it. I'm going to put it on the show.
He's a big dumb billboard saying I'm
He
a
has no
spy.
identity in the future. He can go somewhere where the people from the Earth Directorate cannot.
He is 500
Mark,
years old
I
and
can't go
looks
to that
great.
island with you.
Well, fine. When I'm taken prisoner on the Draconia, I know who I can count on. Who my real
Pamela
friends are.
Hensley. That's who you can
right.
count on.
Yeah, you know it, baby. Okay, so I think we got a couple
my
that we
gosh.
narrated. No Way Out is in
Yeah.
contention. I'm surprised the Spy Game didn't get a Ronin. I think we could say is contention.
Ronin,
Austin Powers were in contention. Any of the Mission Possible movies, possibly. We should narrow it down. Just a
Manchurian
man called
Candidate?
Flintstone still is
Man
out there waiting to be picked,
Oh.
like for Little League. But nobody wants to pick Fred. He's just sitting on the sidelines with his little club.
Wow.
Bam, bam. Okay.
I would love to champion Ronin because I think it's a movie that is kind of underseen.
I would go with that too.
And it's-
I
I
just
think it's-
ambushed you with a coffee cup.
That's right. Oh my God, such a great scene. Such a great freaking scene.
I think that's a movie that maybe
No,
some of our
I'd
listeners
go
could
with Ronin
discover
in a
and enjoy.
heartbeat.
Yeah, for
Absolutely.
sure.
Absolutely.
It's so smart. It's so good. The action is great. It's smart. And, we all love Frankenheimer, who made Manchurian Candidate.
Right.
To come back, he does this movie in the early 60s, and then here in the 90s, he's just as vibrant and smart.
That's like George Miller. He comes roaring back out of
and-
nowhere.
And it's got one of probably among the best 3 car chases of all time. That actually that aren't in a
I would
George
say
Miller movie.
the best.
It's so great. And he's not De Niro's not phoning it in.
Yeah.
No.
Right.
You know, he
is
gives
in
a
that
great
movie.
subtle performance, but it's not because he's cashing a check. It's because he's really good, and Jean Reno is great, and their friendship is great.
Yep.
And Ben Kingsley is just everybody's really good in that movie. Ben Kingsley's not in that movie.
Ben Kingsley would have been great. He was
He
so
would have
great.
been great had he been in that movie.
But Michael Lonsdale is.
I know Michael Lonsdale's awesome in that movie. Who's also awesome. I wouldn't consider this a spy movie in Night of the Jackal. Day of the Jackal.
Day of the Jackal.
Day of the Jackal.
Night of the Jackal came after.
In Day of the Jackal. So, look, I'm a
The
big Michael
Evening of the
Lonsdale fan. So,
Oh yeah, it's Jonathan Pryce and Sean,
Jonathan Pryce,
yeah,
right,
and,
of course.
Stellan Skarsgård and Sean Bean.
yes.
Scene Bean.
Guess who dies in the movie?
Yeah.
Pretty much all of them.
Oh,
Actually.
yeah, I was gonna say. But anyway, well, look, this was a great week. I think let me check the envelope and see if we were right. Friday. Oh my!
You know
God.
they can see you.
Oh yeah, I forgot to read it.
You look like an idiot now.
Why is today any different than every other day? So, indeed, it was Ronan.
Good. Thank goodness.
So, anyway, wow, great week, and there's an abundance of riches. So many movies we didn't pick. That could
Go see
easily.
all of these
Argo.
secretly if you'd like.
Yeah, it's in
That's right.
secret.
Send us your secret vote on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and all that social media nonsense. Okay, well, cool. Well, listen, I want to before we finish.
Shall we recap?
I want to recap, and then I want to ask Bill Ritter his spy movie. He's been thinking about it for the last 50 minutes.
Let's see. How about the Falcon and the Snowman?
Oh, good
okay.
pick.
Yeah.
and the
Timothy
Snowman.
Hutton. You know him from
That's
Leverage.
Sean
You know
Penn?
and love him from Leverage. And before that, he was the Falcon and the Snowman. Which was he? Was he Snowman?
Was
or
he
Falcon?
Snowman or Falcon?
I like that
I don't
movie a
know.
lot.
It was Sean Penn too, right?
With Sean Penn, yeah.
Not Sean Bean.
Who is the Falconer? Okay, and it was what a great mid '80s movie.
Yeah.
Was that John Schlesinger? I think who directed that.
Yeah.
Okay, still got it. Okay, and of course, Natalie, what's your pick for Spy Week?
Mine's True Lies.
True
Okay,
Lies.
yeah. Okay, so True Lies does make an appearance here on the show. Okay, Monday,
Monday is Michael Caine in The Ipcress File.
Tuesday,
Sneakers.
Wednesday,
The Bourne Identity.
Thursday, the best film Alfred Hitchcock never made. Stanley Donen's Singing in the Rain. No. Stanley Donen's Charade. And Friday, it's John Frankenheimer's Ronin.
Dude, this
What
is
a
a good week.
What a week. If you watch no other week of the 4:30 movie, you should watch it this week.
You're
'cause
going to
this
be
is-
falling right off the edge of your seat after watching this.
or be poisoned by cyanide. Who knows? Because it's Spy Week. Anyway, we want to thank you for joining us for Spy Week. We'll be back next Friday with an all-new 4:30 movie theme week. And if you're a fan of this podcast, you may want to check out Electric Surge's other podcasts like Inglorious Treksperts, the only podcast for Star Trek fans with life, every Saturday, and The Rebel and the Rogue, a Star Wars podcast, every Tuesday, along with Best Movies Never Made every other Monday. If you enjoyed this podcast, please rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcast. And before we leave, I'd be remiss if I didn't offer a very special thanks to Bill Ritter for the Falcon and the Snowman suggestion, as well as making it sound great behind the big board. And, of course, our producer, Natalie Miscali, who's back there and is a fan of True Lies, like Steve and Darren and Ashley. And, of course, our executive producer, Dean Devlin, without whom the show would not be possible. I am going to stealthily slip away to end the show. But before I do, I just want to remind you, Eyewitness News starts now.
This week's episode is brought to you by Mega Dodo Productions, publishers of the Encyclopedia Galactica and the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Don't panic!
You're listening to the Electric Surge Network.